Hi, I'm Jeannie Hebert-Brown. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I have been a social worker for over 50 years. I'm 80 years old now, and I am still working because I love this career. I decided I would make a recollection of my life seen through the lens of being a social worker, specifically a psychiatric social worker. And I'm hoping you'll find it interesting. If you have questions or comments, get in touch with me and I will try my best to answer them. You can text me at 619 997 1616. It's really not too surprising to me that I ended up in this career because I've always had a predisposition to be kind and nice and like to figure things out and help people. Now, maybe partly this is a compensation because my father was very critical of me and was difficult to get along with, and maybe I was always trying to be so good and to get his approval, although I never really did. But that's probably part of it. And another factor was I was born in 1944. And in the 40s and in the 50s, women were expected to be compliant caregivers. And then I was thinking, too, there's probably a genetic component. For thousands of years, women stayed in the caves and took care of the babies, the children, the elderly, the sickly. And I think there's probably that aspect of us that's kind of hardwired in our systems. My grandmother, Jeannie, who I was named for, was a helper. She lived in a tenement in Kilmarnock, Scotland. And when some of the other women in the tenement couldn't get their shortbread together, I don't know if you've ever made shortbread, but it is really hard to. I have trouble getting it together. I don't know if I ever really. It's really hard. And when the women in the tenement would have trouble, they would call for her, and she would go rushing to them and work that flour and the butter and make the shortbread. And also she would always have someone at the dinner table that was a soldier that was lonely, or a poor person that didn't have anywhere to go for dinner. And she had 5 kids and 3 adults, and they didn't have much money. They had a 2-room tenement, but there was always room at the table for someone else. And I'm a bit like that. But fortunately for me, I've learned about codependency. I've learned about being able to make sure that when I do things, I'm doing them in cooperation with my real self, not that compensated good person who often said yes when she meant no. Codependency occurs when you take care of others and neglect yourself. It takes self-awareness to know if caring or doing something is what we really want to do. So are we obliged to do this? Do we say yes? Do we say no? Here's an example of my codependency. When I got married, I registered at a department store for some really pretty china dishware. But when I saw the price, I said, oh no, my friends can't pay that kind of money. So I picked out a different pattern that was more agreeable to my price point. And I got a lot of this dishware for my wedding, and I took it home with me, boxed it up, and put it in the attic. And a couple of years passed, and I thought one day, how come I don't ever use that china? And then dawn broke over Marblehead, and I realized my codependency had purchased that china, not me. So sometimes people tell me that they say yes not because they really want to do something, but because they feel selfish if they don't do it. So let's consider this. What's the difference between selfishness and self-esteem? When we end up being self-esteeming, we care for ourselves first. And that just makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, well, I guess you'd have to say you have to care for children first because they can't take care of themselves. But after that, it's you who comes next, and you have to care for yourself and do the things that are good for you, and that will improve your mood and your whole sense of purpose in life. Sometimes taking care of other people will be what you want to do. It will be part of the natural behavior. But frankly, I think most people who have a codependent nature don't need to worry about being selfish because they're not going to be selfish. They don't have any training in being selfish. In any event, it takes self-awareness to know that we are doing the ask because we really want to. The goal is to care for yourself, esteem yourself, and do something. Do everything because you want to. I think that's a really important dynamic to talk to about anybody who comes to therapy. Because if you get stuck being a caregiver when you don't want to, eventually you lose track of yourself. You lose track of your true wants and desires because you've been so long avoiding them or pushing them aside for someone else. But if you work on yourself and you learn your preferences, then you can set boundaries. And those boundaries will keep you safe. I was thinking about when I had a phone call from a man in the probation department, and he was going on about me not having done something correctly, which I really had, or in my opinion, I had. And finally, I just reminded myself, I don't have to put up with this. I don't listen to people talking to me like this. So I just said, excuse me, but I don't listen to this kind of talk. I don't want to hear this kind of talk. So I will be hanging up now. And I hung up. Never heard from him again. There was no fallout from that at all. And I think the other part of why I've lasted so long in this career is because I have boundaries. Because if you don't have boundaries in a career like social work, you will get burned out. You can't help it because too much will be asked of you. One important thing that helps with social work boundaries, and boundaries in other jobs too, is leaving work at work. I remember going home and talking about my clients with my husband, and then thinking about my clients in the course of the evening, and then going to bed and waking up at 3 in the morning worrying about some client. And fortunately for me, I just said, no, this is not going to happen. So what I did was I stood in the office doorway and I said, okay, you guys, stay here. I'll be back in the morning. I will worry about you all day tomorrow, but I'm not going to worry about you now because I'm going home. I'm going to worry about that. And so I learned to leave work at work. And it took maybe a month of standing there talking to myself. So I recommend that kind of boundary. You know, it's basically incompatible to think two thoughts at once. So if I were busy thinking about my clients, I could grab a newspaper or a magazine and read something else, have a mantra, have a prayer, but take my mind off the thought of work and put it on the thought of whatever, something different. In fact, I got so good at setting boundaries about work that occasionally someone would need a Saturday appointment, and I would say to them, you know, I leave work on Friday night, and I'm done with work. And so the chances of me not showing up for your appointment are pretty high. You better call me and make sure I'm on my way to see you. I once worked with a doctor who had this issue of worrying about his patients all the time. So we developed a little routine where he took his stethoscope off, and when he took it off and put it down on his desk, that was his signal, his cue that he was done. He was done with work. These boundaries keep you safe and protect you. Another boundary that I'm really glad that I developed was a mantra. It's their choice. I had a client who I really liked so much. His name was Jesse. And one day I got a call about him. He was standing naked in the middle of Dort Highway, and all he had was his appointment card to me in his hand. So the police called me and they took him to the mental hospital. And I thought to myself, I just felt terrible. I thought he could have gotten hurt. Did I miss something? I didn't see that he had decompensated that much. I was going on in my thinking about it. And then it occurred to me that this was his choice. This was my choice. And I had to accept that my clients can make their foolish or not foolish choices. And I had to accept this, that it is their choice, not my choice for them, but their choice, or I would never be able to do this job. So I needed to detach from feeling responsible for the dysfunctional things that my clients did. And my mantra became, it's their choice. Of course, boundaries can't happen without equality. When man is the head of the household and is the boss and makes all the decisions, then women can't protect themselves with boundaries. But as I was growing into the 60s and the 70s, women's rights were up for discussion. In fact, many types of rights were up for discussion because the times, they were a-changin'.